to bring in Nidhi Sharma into the discussion now. Nidhi, whereabouts are you? Hi. Because, I mean, I know you've had a really difficult time when you moved to Australia 7 years ago. You were inspired by artists just like the ones that we see here to actually go ahead and join the live entertainment industry. But it's been very hard and you haven't really ended up living that dream, have you?
Yeah, so when I came to Australia, inspired by artists, live productions, the entire event life cycle, I knew it was a scene that I wanted to get into, but I also knew I had to go against all my sensibilities about money, where I might live, what my lifestyle might be.
You had to balance out a very insecure kind of life, right?
So to balance out having a career I loved, I'd have to give up the kind of, I guess, lifestyle luxuries my peers may have had.
Yeah.
And that has been a struggle for about 5 years, let alone the last 2.
So what have you ended up doing?
Luckily, I landed a job as a ticketing manager for 2.5 years, and then prior to COVID. And then last year, I had 2 short-term contracts and 4 casual jobs just to stay in the industry, just to stay employed.
And what did you imagine, or did you hope your life was going to be like?
I didn't imagine like stars and hanging out backstage and all that, but I just imagined being involved in that joy that people get from events, just being a little piece in that thing. So when people go to a show, you can go, I was a bit of that. I contributed to that. People go home happy, and events bring joy. Music brings joy to people, and that's what you want to be part of.
But it's hard for you to make long-term decisions, I guess, and to plan like others might to own a home or to start anything else with your life.
Yeah, it's interesting. In a pub with my friends, I'll talk about like, mortgages and stuff, and they'll say, oh, well, you chose to work in events, so what do you expect? And it's really like, it's accepted that poor pay if you work in events, poor pay if you work in this industry, which is a strange way to be.
Katie, can I get you to pick up on that? Because, I mean, you've been there at the beginning of your career.
Yeah, look, I know it's been... I don't think people realise how catastrophic the loss of income was. So when it started, it was 500 and then it was 200 and then it was 50 and then it was 10 and it was 2. Like yourself, I was working in the industry and I got, I think, date 3 into a 25-date tour. And I'm the sole financial provider for my family, and there was nothing for me to fall back on.
Let me just frame that for a second, because you're a household name, right? People are just going to assume that, you know, they hear your music, they buy your records, they see you performing. You must be rolling in it, Katie.
No, it's a gig-to-gig economy, and we really, you know, most of us are just going from gig to gig, and we try to save some. And I'm very lucky. I've been a full-time artist my whole life, which is a very rare privilege. Yeah. A very rare privilege. But I must say, the night when this fella passed the motion for artists to get JobKeeper and JobSeeker, and the Arts Minister voted against it, I was unbelievably depressed at the thought that the person that should have been fighting for my rights voted against it. And that was, you know, it was thanks to people like Tony that we were then able to get on JobKeeper, which saved my life. Like all other small businesses, well, I couldn't have survived without it. And I'm not afraid to say that. You know, I lost all my... It just went from 100 to nothing within... And the inequity between... And as much as I adore classical musicians, but the inequity between classical musicians and non-classical musicians has been pretty profound to observe. And it's a big discussion, you know, but it's been a very... Yeah, it's been a very challenging time.
Looking back on that, Paul Fletcher, was that a mistake?
Well... Around 90% of people in the cultural and creative sector were eligible for JobKeeper. As you know, there was an economy-wide set of arrangements. So JobKeeper was about keeping people in touch with their employment, and then for those who weren't able to be supported by that, there was JobSeeker. So our focus was to get those economy-wide support arrangements in place. I made an estimate at the time that Tony was very critical of, that we believed that between $4 and $10 billion would go to people in the culture and creative sector. In fact, we had the Bureau of Communications and Arts Research check that number out, and that is how much. In fact, it was about $11 billion. So there's very, very significant support provided across the economy, but certainly within the culture and creative sector.
Except, of course, for all those who couldn't get JobKeeper, and that's where you go to JobSeeker. But these were people who were working.
Point. The analysis from the Bureau of Communications and Arts Research found that 90% of people working in the culture and creative sector were eligible for JobKeeper. And for those who were not, there was the availability of JobSeeker, and that was true of other sectors.
I'll get the Minister to jump in here.
Yeah, there's a bit of wordplay here. The term cultural and creative sector includes people who work in clothing retail. So when we're talking about cultural and creative sector, that ABS section includes everybody who's working in checkouts at Best and Less as though we're now talking about artists.
Yeah,
It includes people who work at the zoo. It's a definition of statistics as broad as possible to try to claim that JobKeeper reached further in the arts sector than it actually did.
Well, let's also
if you were, and I support that you had JobKeeper. We called for wage subsidies at a time that the government initially wasn't going to offer wage subsidies at all. I'm glad you did. Yep. But if you were going to design a wage subsidy to exclude as many people as possible in the arts sector, you would have done it with the casual rules that you adopted, where instead of being 12 months in the industry made you qualify, it had to be 12 months with the same employer. And the nature of this sector, that rule just knocked people out, left, right and centre.
Well, very quickly, because I want to come to Darren.
I just want to be clear, because Tony has made this point before, that in some way it's misleading to refer to the cultural and creative sector. There's press release after press release that Tony has put out referring to the cultural and creative sector being $115 billion, 600,000 plus employees. That is a well-accepted term used by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Within it, it includes performing artists, it includes libraries, it includes broadcasting, it includes digital. That is the definition of the sector, and then there's a series of subsectors within it.
Okay, Darren?
It just makes me really angry, because you're completely dismissing the one aspect of everyone's employment, which is dignity. Dignity in employment. Everybody deserves to feel a sense of self-respect and dignity. You know, I did not come from money. I came from a proudly working class family, and I've worked my entire life, and I have not always been successful. I've had some spectacular failures in the music industry. But, you know, when you're talking about a musician whose gig is from, you know, one self-funded gig to the next, I, for the last 15 years, have been an independent artist, not signed to a record company. I am my own boss. I employ so many people. I proudly do that. And, you know, I don't have an employer. I am my own business. And, you know, to say to somebody who is desperate to get a gig just playing at an RSL, or, you know, that's been doing that for 30 years of their life, that they could just go and work somewhere else. And some of the messaging around that, yes, I live overseas, but I'm proudly Australian, and I watched all of that messaging about, hey, you could just retrain, in like dismissing someone's worth, like.
And we've lost so many great creatives,
and
they won't come back.
No,
sadly, you know, they've had to move into midwifery.
It was just incredibly insulting for people who had given up their entire lives to perform for all of us.
Okay, let me hear from Adam on this.
I think it can be difficult to structure things in a way that captures everyone in the creative industry, because there is no one model for being a creative person. There is, if you want to open a restaurant, you go get a lease, you incorporate a company, you employ a chef and you employ a waiter. It doesn't work that way in creative industries. There are lots of different ways to be an artist, and to try and, I guess, capture that is part of the difficulty in the creative economy, because it's not like a mining company. There's probably 2 or 3 structures that mining companies have, but for creative people, it can be picking up a guitar and walking out into the street and starting to play, or it can be setting up a company or incorporating or doing all these things. And part of that makes it very difficult to regulate an industry like that and to capture it with something like an emergency action in the course of a pandemic. And so I don't envy the people that have to do that, but we want to capture as much of that industry as we can, you know. And
in a way, we're our own worst enemy. We really need to work together in the way the sporting industry does. They obviously lobby well, they have the ear of Parliament, and our industry, we need to get better at representing who we are.